I ended up looking up him and trying to understand more about it because my initial thought was like ecological, like what? Like, are these guys training on the grass? Like, what's going on? So basically, my initial thoughts were, you know, this is interesting and I like it, right? I want to first come out and say, like, I want to defend him from the haters who just come right out and shit on it. The ecological approach to jujitsu is today's topic. This is something that I was introduced to probably about 8 months ago, maybe a year ago at the most. Some subscribers sent to me through Instagram, some podcasts and things with Greg Souders on it. And then they were asking me what I thought about it. And I had to listen quite a bit to see what this was all about. And my initial thoughts were, this is wrestling practice because, I started wrestling in 1991, and every coach I've ever had does some variant of what he's talking about. So I ended up looking up him and trying to understand more about it because my initial thought was like ecological, like what? So I've been in psychology and neuroscience since 2001, and where I was actually doing research. I started in 99, but I really started getting into research, psychological and neuroscience research in 2001. And I've never heard of this ecological approach to learning thing. Nobody has ever said that term. And to me, the first thing that came out ecological is being in the neuroscience field. I'm in an interdisciplinary program. I always have been, like, for the last 23 years. And so I know ecologists and stuff. And I was like, are these guys training on the grass? Like, what's going on? Because ecology is like you're studying an organism in its environment. Now I'll come back to that because natural environment is very different than, wrestling and jujitsu isn't natural. Okay. It's not like, because I do sensory physiology, sensory learning. I'm a oral cavity researcher, and I study like how when you introduce an animal to a novel stimulus, how the learning works with it and how their innate reactions work with it and the neuron types that are responsible for it. And so I've been doing sensory and learning for a long time. And so I was interested in hear more of what was said because he introduced, Robert Gray. So I started looking into that. Right, I'm an academic. I just got promoted to full professor, which though the official title won't happen probably for months because the university is the only place that can promote you and not pay you for a year. So I'm an academic, right? So I like scholarly stuff, but I also like to speak in a very common language because it's what can translate to people who aren't, their English isn't their first language, and a number of things. Okay, and so and on papers that way people can read what it is that I'm talking about. I don't like to speak in an esoteric language, so I'll get back to that because Souders definitely speaks in a very esoteric language, which to me was difficult to understand at first, and then I had to learn what he was talking about in order to understand. So, so basically, my initial thoughts were, you know, this is interesting and I like it, right? I want to first come out and say, like, I want to defend him from the haters who just come right out and shit on it, okay? Because I can relate to what he's going through because I brought up things that have been known in the wrestling world on my channel, like many things, and people freak out about it. Like when I say, don't come up to the waist in the dog fight, you want to drop back down to the single. Like this is fucking really well-known wrestling stuff. Or don't push and come up from the single to a body lock. If you're pushing, you're going to get Uchimated. You have to get inside thigh position. Now all of a sudden everybody's talking about it. But before everybody freaked out when I said it, right? So anytime that you have a belief in something and then you have an opinion on it, you have to expect that some people aren't going to like it. So because I've been in the department of psychology forever, I know a lot of therapists, and a therapist that I know says, and this is a really cool line. So if you take anything from this video, take this, okay? That he said, what's wrong with everybody liking you? And I was like, well, I don't know. And then he says, if everybody likes you, then you stand for nothing. If you have a stance on something, then you are going to have people disagree with you. And that's fine. You have to be willing to do that. Now, Souders really is taking a strong stance. He really believes it. He's read about this stuff a lot. And you know, not half, I don't know. I mean, people, it seems like there's probably plenty of people who love this, but there's a really loud people on the internet, which is generally why I don't like to read what people say, because whenever you hide behind the cloak of anonymity, people will say whatever they feel like. And this is a problem in the science world too. I actually really hate anonymous peer review, because people say to you what they normally wouldn't say to you when they're anonymous, because like there's no repercussions for them being an asshole. And so I want to first get that out there, that I defend the guy, okay? And I know this type of training because what he's doing is more specialized than what we do in wrestling, but he has a point, okay? So everybody's on a continuum. Okay, so everybody's on a continuum, and uh in his case, right, with all sorts of topics, in his case, he absolutely hates drilling, right? Or he doesn't do it, right? Because he doesn't think it's useful. And then there are some people, and that's more rare, who like drill primarily and then they train very little. Now, I'm more on a continuum where I like situational stuff. But I've been a wrestler for since 1991, and there is a place for drilling, but it's done differently, I think, than how it's done in jujitsu. And I do agree with him on that like drilling in jujitsu is not done very well. Like I came in when I first started jujitsu, it was like the guy's just like laying there and giving you zero body feel when you're doing something. He hates that. That's fine. But that's not really what wrestlers do. So, well, let me give you a more advanced situation, right? Like, so, in wrestling, you know, if you have a practice, right, you're using like some static drilling, and the guy's still moving with you, but it's a warm up. And uchikomi is a warm up in judo. Okay, so these things aren't like they're movement patterns to get your body moving in that direction when you're gonna, you know, perform things at high effort. And then, you know, we would move. So there's like static drilling, and then we would do like, okay, you know, we're doing setups and wrestling, and like I push him, he pushes me back, I pull, right, I go to an outside single, I pick it up and finish it to the ground. They always make you want to finish it, because if you stop, it's not very realistic. Okay, in terms of, you need to have it in your mind, you need to have these patterns down, these sequences down, so that when you do it in real life, you know, you're not going to get the exact same situation, but you kind of know what to do so that when you're in that situation, you can perform on it. Okay, so now to move that forward, now, like in collegiate wrestling, and even when I was in high school and higher level, you know, I want to like have the guy block my first move, you know, like give me some resistance, block my first move. So I have to go to another one, maybe even block that one. And it gets more advanced. And then now you're actually getting some cardio in there, right? I might take him down. He does a stand up. He gets away. He's doing all the proper technique. He takes me down, right? And then that's still drilling. Okay. And then we have like drills. And I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this, but I do want to describe why I think wrestling, drilling, and drills are different than what people are doing in jujitsu. And I know I heard him say he actually learned the ecological approach from, well, he introduced Robert Gray, but then he also says, you know, from wrestling practice, he brings up Kerry Colot. But quickly, like, let me give you an example. Okay, so this would be like high school kids that don't know shit. Okay, so like you put somebody like in referee's position, sort of, which, or like a tighter turtle, and you just have the guy on top put his hands behind his back, his chest is on the other guy's back, and you just have him spin. He's getting used to these movement patterns. Okay, back and forth, and coach is either using a whistle or yelling out which direction to go. Okay, and then uh now you're allowed to use your hands. Okay. That would be like the next part. And then now the bottom man, you put your hands back behind your back again. Now the bottom man, as you start spinning, can lift his hand up to block you from getting behind him. Right. And then he goes the other side, he blocks you from going around. Okay. And then now what that's doing is it's teaching you, like if he's blocking it, to switch directions very quickly, because it's like really hard, if not impossible, to lift both hands up at the same time. You kind of need to have one, right? And so you learn, then you move this way, you switch, you move the other way really quickly. It's teaching the people how to do that, right? And then now, you know, you can use your hands and then and you can do this within whatever parameters that you want. Okay. And then, like maybe you have more advanced stuff. Okay. Like the person's got a single leg and like your goal is to do this and the other person's goal is to do that. Top man's got a near side cradle. Bottom man's job is to not get turned no matter what. Top man's job is to just turn them. Those are drills. Okay. Not drilling. And it's not even really situational sparring, although it can become that. And it just depends on what parameters you want to set. Like, do you want to say, like, okay, you stop when you put the person on the back, let's say in the cradle situation, or do you keep wrestling from there? Right. So that was how, when I first started learning about what he was doing, it's more so what he's talking about. There is nothing wrong with that. Okay. He doesn't believe in static drilling, but I have a problem with that to a certain degree, and I'm allowed to say that. Okay. Like, so I'm going to get my ass kicked for saying it, but I don't fucking care, because just like him, right, I have my beliefs in how I think that this stuff works. And I have 33 years of training into this shit and 20 something years of coaching, 25, right? Or something like that. And so fucking lost track because I've been doing it for so long. And so, yeah, it's 25 this year. So it's not intuitive. Not everybody learns everything by intuition. So doing setups to get people out of position is not fucking intuitive. And you can't just learn it, which he calls emergence, just from, if you put two kids together who don't know what they're doing, one person's going to turn their back and put the other person in a headlock with no arm, which is illegal in wrestling, or they're going to do all kinds of weird shit that doesn't work. Okay. And then, so you have to, there are things that they have to learn, certain positional ties, right? You have to do these sorts of things because it's not intuitive to learn how to get people out of position, right? So you can push them when they push you back, right? Elbow pass, for example, and how to block with your head, and all of these things that have to get tight in order for situations to work. Because yes, he's correct when he says something like, you can't drill moves because a person will have an infinite number of things that they can do in reaction to that. While it's like theoretically true that people have the ability to do an infinite number of things, they don't. Human beings move certain ways, man. Like they do. If you, for example, mount somebody, right, and they're new, they put their arms up and then they get arm locked, right? So that's like they could have done 1,000,000,000 other things, an infinite amount of other things, but they didn't. They all do the same shit. And it's the same thing with wrestling. If I push into you, you push back. And if you push back, then I snap, right? Or I pull and I pull over, I elbow tie, I get past elbows. These are all things that you kind of have to fucking learn, okay? And then integrate into situational training, and then integrate into live training. And when you see people who have very good practices that are run really well, where you have your athletes kind of all having a very similar system and how they push, pull, boom, boom, and they're switching, so they're attacking both sides, and then you see those programs kick the shit out of people. So it's not that it doesn't work. Okay, so he's very far on the continuum of no drilling, and I'm closer to the middle, but further to where he is, right, in the situational sort of stuff. Now, and it takes time when you have somebody who's brand new to sort of get their movement right. And like he says, a coach's job is to jump in and sort of help. But in terms of intuition and everything being intuitive, not everything is intuitive. Now, because I'm an expert in sensory learning and I study, evolution, right, is that like we're intuitive in in an environment that you're naturally in, right? Like natural environment. And then none of this stuff is natural. Okay. So for example, Robert Gray gave an awesome example about how, like, if you're outside and there's trees and you're in a field and somebody throws a ball, like, how do you know how to speed up and everything to get it? Well, we're very visual animals. I don't want to get too down the rabbit hole neuroscience here, okay, but this is shit that I know very well. Okay. I just got promoted to full professor of neuroscience and sensory physiology and everything, and learning is my expertise in that, and endocrinology. But like, so we're a very visual species, right? So we're very good at judging distance and then adapting the motor response, and all of this field stuff is going to help with distances and vision, and you have an awesome processing Like rodents don't have visual processing like that. They're chemosensory, which is why I study them, because I study the sense of taste. I do oral physiology and behavior. And so like taste and mouthfeel and stuff like that, right? And so like human beings have awesome visual systems. So that is a more natural like environment, the scene, because like as hunters you need to be able to judge distances and speed and these kinds of things in order to hunt. Okay, so nothing that we are doing is natural. Okay, we haven't evolved to wrestle, we haven't evolved to do jujitsu. And while the parameters that we can put up for training can help us to learn in these training environments, they aren't intuitive always. Okay, some things are intuitive, like scrambling becomes intuitive, but like setups and stuff I don't think are intuitive, and that's okay. I disagree with him on that, and that'd be fine. Okay, but where things get weird, and I think this is where like the internet kicks the shit out of him, is that he uses a very esoteric language. The most useful course that I ever took in graduate school was this course called Scientific Communication. And it's about using a common language, because not everybody, and this is for writing and communicating like as a speaker, but like not everything is going to be translated easily to people whose English is not their first language. And if you want to reach the masses, you need to speak in a common language, not an esoteric or borderline arcane language that needs to be studied in order to be understood. So I don't use his terminology. I've been in wrestling forever, so we have our own. But you can say to a training partner something like, okay, the goal is this and the other person's goal is that. Whereas he says like, and then if you put the person on his back, then stop training and reset. Whereas he would say, that we have to focus our attention and intention on task focused movement solutions for these things to emerge, right? Using a constraint led approach. It's like, what the fuck did you just say? Like I had to learn all of this stuff, and it gets deeper than that. I'm not even good at this language. So that's kind of where he's gotten his ass kicked. And then I can defend him, okay, where people kick his ass like about in the comment section, and then he responded to it and they say, oh, he's so defensive. And I'm like, you're gaslighting him. You're starting an argument. You're hiding behind the cloak of anonymity, right? And then when he gets annoyed by it because he's putting his opinion out there, then people attack him. And like I can totally relate to what that guy is going through in terms of being a content person and just telling people what you know because you want them to learn, and then them being accusing you of all kinds of things like, oh, he's just trying to chase clout. Shut the fuck up. Like just train, try to learn new things and all of that. So what I think people have, and this happens all the time on the internet, they don't necessarily know what he's trying to do or even necessarily disagree with what he's trying to do for the community and stuff, but they don't like him. And it's like, whatever, you know what I mean? Like there are plenty of coaches that I had that I actually didn't like as a person. I'm not going to hang out with them, but I have tremendous respect for what they do. And so what he's doing is very similar to wrestling practice. He did say that that's where he got it from. It took me a while for me to hear him say that. I had to listen to hours, and frankly, I was being like, "Oh, come on, man! Like, is this guy a charlatan and just trying to do all these things like charlatans do?" And there are plenty of them in jiu-jitsu where they take shit and they don't give anybody credit. At least he's giving Robert Gray credit. At least he's giving Kerry Colott credit, right? Where a lot of these people will take freaking wrestling moves and they don't give fucking anybody credit, and they act like they've invented a whole new style of grappling and sell you instructionals and fucking lie to you about where they got that information from. They don't have to do that, but that's the appropriate, and it would be the scholarly like thing to do, to cite your sources, because then if anything, people can go back and look. So for example, when I teach the outside single, I'm like, this is the John Smith how to get out of being stuffed on a single leg, right? When I teach the body lock where you step your leg in the middle to block the uchimata, which people freaked out about, which is awesome. This is known shit like that people have been doing in Russia since God knows how long. And my collegiate wrestling coach was, an Olympian in Greco and head coach of the Olympic team. And so he taught us to step in the middle, right? Like in Greco and in judo, you can do all kinds of things there. You have ko uchigari, you have o uchigari because you're in the middle and you're blocking his turn throws and all this. And I got fucking lit up for it, like anyway, not to go too far off the tangent, but like I cite those people. I say this is the Saris body lock. This is the John Smith single, wherever I learned it from. And jujitsu is always trying to sell something, so they never fucking tell you where it came from. And so I think he's good for jujitsu. I think it's good that he's brought these things up. I don't think it's good though that he uses this arcane esoteric language because it comes off. People don't like being talked to that way. I'm not saying that he is a pseudo intellectual, but it definitely comes off as though he is because there's a lot of that in jujitsu. It's like people look towards you as like the most brilliant person. Ooh, this is the smartest person, And like, there's not that many people in jujitsu who are actual scholars. Like, Lachlan Giles is the only person I know who has a PhD, who's a black belt at a very high level coach. Everybody else is not. And so it's not a requirement. Like in wrestling, we never are like, oh yeah. Like we say, okay, you went to college, you wrestled in college. So obviously, you're somewhat smart. But we were never like, oh, like what advanced degrees do you have? Do you have a PhD in philosophy? Because now your PhD in philosophy of some fucking obscure thing that happened 100 fucking years ago is going to help you teach wrestling. No, like it's not. Okay. I mean, you might learn some teaching practices and stuff from it, but it's so weird. Like this community is so different. I'm still trying to learn about it. I think it's not the jujitsu people, but it's online people. And you never know who you're talking to because it's all in like anonymous. It could be some 8-year-old who's just like interested in jujitsu. And in fact, it seems that way when you're talking to people. So, don't attack Souders' character just because he's putting himself out there and, he's taking a chance at something that he believes in, right? And it might help you, okay? But me personally, like if I were to, use this, like if I were to modify how I coach wrestling, I wouldn't use his language because it's too much of a barrier to get people involved. And that's the only real criticism that I have is that one, there are ways to drill that are very useful. So I disagree with that. And then two, like there are ways to talk to people in a more common language that you don't have to create this. And I don't know if he's doing that because it's part of the ecological psychology. Like I said, I've been in psychology since 1999. And then neuroscience, from that point on. And also psychology, right? I have a bachelor's and a master's in psychology and more neuroendocrinology for my master's, and then sensory physiology, right? Learning, right? Endocrinology for my PhD. But I don't believe in talking down to people. I don't believe in talking to them in obscure language that's difficult to understand because it's too much of a barrier, and particularly if somebody's not a native speaker. So only those things, right? Like I do like some forms of drilling. I think that not everything is intuitive, right? Math's not intuitive a lot, like especially advanced math. Musical theory is not intuitive, right? So written language is not intuitive. We learn because we've evolved to do this. We've evolved to learn spoken language, but then all of a sudden when you go to teach a child written language is not intuitive. You actually have to be like, this symbol makes this sound. So I think as a learning thing, you have to teach people building blocks, right, along the way, right, because that part's not intuitive. And then they can allow their intuition to become an advanced at that particular skill. And I think that's more or less what he's getting at. So, but otherwise, I mean, it's useful stuff, but you don't have to abandon, I don't believe, all drilling. I just think that drilling that's being done in jiu-jitsu is kind of shitty. And you should probably, go to an actual wrestling practice so you can learn how, they drill, they do drilling, they do drills, right? Situational wrestling. These like in their constraint led approaches, but I call them more like basis of situational stuff, and then of course live sparring. Okay, so anyway, and that way you can test all these things that you've practiced in this because when you practice in one in thing, you become more adroit at the variances in that, and so like there will be some variability, but I don't believe that you'll be like what he says immune to novelty, because he even admits that the reason that people are that John Danaher's guys kick everybody's asses is because they have stuff that nobody's seen. So that just doesn't, so that inconsistency, I think sometimes is where people are trying to trip him up. But if you spend hours and hours and hours on a podcast talking, people are going to try to find inconsistencies of things that you say. I did it too when I was listening to him. I'm like, that's inconsistent, whatever. But it doesn't matter, because I don't want to tear down the person, because I think that kind of shit needs to stop, right? Because then what you do is you try to attach a label to it. When you attach a label to something, then you just try to dismiss it. So anyway, so I hope any of this stuff helps you, and what I think about it. And I think it's useful. And I think, though, like, I don't think that you should just not throw away drilling altogether. I just think that you need to not have a person be a scarecrow when you're doing stuff, unless it's just for a warm up. You want to have them give you resistance so that you learn how to push pull, because wrestling requires a lot of these things that, and you see it all over the world, where people have, techniques that they do. Because, like, he refuses to use the word technique. And I think he is trying to separate himself out from other people by doing that. And that's fine. He's allowed to do that. Okay. It's a free country. So anyway, let me know what you think. And thanks for watching.